Thank you for that introduction, and happy to be here. So first of all, I want to start off with some acknowledgements. I want to thank Imperial Metals for the ability to use this data and work with it. And then I want to thank Geosoft and Seequent, especially Jeff and Maria, for inviting me and working with my logistics today surrounding my little one in the back. And then finally, my coworker at Condor Consulting, Francis, who was vital in this project along with my, oh, you guys aren't seeing, I'm changing stuff here, but not there. There. My coworker, Francis, as well as my boss, Ken, who is here today. So today I'm looking at the Red Chris deposit, which is located in northwestern British Columbia. It's within what's called the Golden Triangle. The Red Chris deposit is the gold star with a gold circle around it. It's been mined since 2014, and its life extends to 2043. So it's just basically starting up. This is a calc-alkali copper porphyry deposit and produces copper, gold, and silver. It lies about 80 kilometers south of Dease Lake and is now currently owned 30% by Imperial Metals and 70% by Newcrest Mining as of August this past summer. So here let's take a closer look at the geology surrounding this area. The deposit sits within the late Triassic Stahini group, which is consistent of sediments and volcanics. And it sits on the northern edge of the Bowser Basin, which is a Jurassic Cretaceous clastic. So this figure shows this whole porphyry district in northwestern BC. And you can see the Red Chris sitting there on the top edge of that brown Bowser Basin unit. Now, if we zoom in a little bit more, the deposit itself lies within the red stock unit, and this is the porphyritic diorite. And in the images that I'll show here, it's the pink unit. The mine, the plant pit itself, sits right here. And then we've got Mayfic Volcanics to the north, the Stahini group over here that surrounds the whole area, and then, like I said, this is the Bowser Lake group to the south. And we've got some sandstones and sediments that run along here, and we've got a major fault running along the south edge of the Bowser Basin, the red stock unit. So now if we look at a cross-section through this area, and I'll point over here too. So we're looking at this cross-section here, and you can see the red stock unit with the main ore zone here, the east zone, the south boundary fault. The Bowser Basin is actually just a thin layer over top, and then we've got other rocks underneath, and then the Stahini group to the other side as well. So just giving you kind of an idea of what this geology looks like. So in particular, this south boundary fault will come into play later. So in July 2009, the Titan 24 DCIP and MT survey was collected over the deposit. This is before any mining was done, so it's kind of a neat look to see what things looked like before extraction. Stations were about 100 meters apart along the lines, and we've got 13 lines in total, each 2.5 kilometers long with 400 meters separation. And I mean, if you're interested in geophysical details, they can use the combined pole-dipole right and left array to do this. So the data consists of MT data, magnetotelluric, two different kind of modes, and then the DCIP data. So today I'm going to focus just on the DCIP data, where we look at the normalized voltages and their errors, as well as the phase and the errors, and then we get the apparent resistivities and the chargeabilities from that. So back in 2009, the contractor did 2D inversions of this. So for every line, an image of the Earth was reproduced. And this was done using the UBC codes by Quantec. And so what we get is an image underneath each line of data. So I have a cartoon here that simply says, okay, we've got a line of data here, you get an image of the Earth. A line of data here, another image. So we go from data, algorithm, and we get a 2D model. So that was 2009, that's now 10 years ago. And what the results show here is, so we've got a couple cross-sections through, looking at this line here, and here you can see the map over as well. So what we have here is we see resistive here in blue colors, and then in warmer colors we get conductive features, and then this is the chargeability. So immediately you can see a relationship that there is something very chargeable related to the red stock unit, and then over here to the, it would be on this end here, something more conductive and resistive over here in the Stihini group. Now, this one image here shows an image at the bottom. This is a cross-section through the red stock unit with the deposit sitting down here. Here is that Bowser Lake unit, mafic volcanics here. And now you can really see the relationship between the geophysics and the geology, as well as the cross-section. So we have this chargeable unit here that corresponds to the red stock unit. We have this conductive unit that likely is related to the Bowser Lake, and then we have a sharp boundary between resistive and conductive features. So things line up really well with the geology. One more. This one is on this line here towards the eastern zone, chargeable, and then we get resistive on this end, conductive here with that conductive overburden. And so pretty good for 2D sections, correlation with the geology and such. So last year at Condor, we did additional QA/QC in OASIS montage. So this is where we separated the inline and cross-line readings from the DCIP survey, and we focused only on the inline data. So at a later point, we want to combine the other data with this. We extensively used the OASIS montage IP module. So in there, we could average the duplicate readings. We fixed polarity reversals that were present in the data. And we also removed null coupled readings. So a lot of like that data management that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do was really handy to do in OASIS montage. And then as well, the database management was good to do in OASIS in general. And then we did a 3D inversion. So compared to 10 years ago when 2D was standard, I feel like now we're moving into a 3D world and everything should be done in 3D, but that's my opinion. So we use Voxy within OASIS montage to invert this data in 3D. So compared to my cartoon earlier where we had a model under each line of data, now we produce a volume underneath the entire survey block. So with 3D inversions, the algorithm here allows us to run multiple models. This is very important because you're never just going to run one model and get a straight answer. You need to test which parameters go into your model, which parameters you need to run, set the data uncertainty, what kind of initial starting models you need. And so this also helps to figure out what is the best model, but it also gets you an idea of what your data robustness is and your model robustness. If things change in your model after each iteration that you're trying something new, something's not robust, and I wouldn't trust that personally. But if something is there every single time, then I'm like, yes, this is highly likely that that item is there in the ground. Within OASIS montage, it then becomes also really easy to compare my volumes with my other data sets. So as my geologic maps, any drilling that I might have, and my geophysical maps as well. The nice thing I like about this too, compared to other inversion codes I've used, is that it's a cloud-based algorithm. So I can press start on my laptop, it runs it to the cloud, and I can use my computer to answer emails or work on other projects or make a presentation without actually having to use up my computing power that I have. And it allows for to run larger projects too that I would not personally have the computational power for. So we'll look at the same lines that we did for the 2D, and now we'll look at the 3D model. So these are 2D sections through my 3D model. So here you can see that we still have this resistive area over here that corresponds to the Stihini group. This is our Bowser Lake overburden that's more conductive. And then right here is the red stock unit. And then again, we see that it's chargeable and has somewhat an average resistivity. On the next slide is actually things become a bit more interesting. That overburden is quite more pronounced compared to the 2D, if you remember. I'll compare later. And then here now we see these mafic volcanics are clearly more resistive. Then we have this chargeable body that sits perfectly, really nicely with the red stock, and even kind of starts to extend over to underneath that Bowser Lake. Of course, our data limit is probably not showing much further past here. But again, we see really nice correlations with the geology and with the images, the cross sections. One more. So you got the ore body sits down here. We've got a chargeable body, this overburden here, and then we've got this Stihini group that's more resistive. So the nice thing about 3D is we don't have to just look at cross sections, we can look at depth slices now too. So here's our geologic map that I've shown you before, and now we see this here, this warm color would be conductive, and this is more resistive. So you can see the correlations between the geology up here to the north and then the Bowser Lake. And then also this fault area here, it doesn't line up perfectly, so some of the red stock is actually a bit more conductive as well. But if we look now at the chargeability shows up really nice. Like this is perfectly matching with that red stock unit, and the boundary of the fault would be right here. So versus 2D, we wouldn't have gotten this image before, so it's nice to see this in this kind of view. So in this, now I'm comparing, so this is the, how do I go back? There. So this is the resistivity, this is the chargeability, and now I've put over the geology lines to kind of show a bit better of what we're looking at. So here is that fault that we talked about before, perfectly lines up here to bound that chargeable unit, the red stock, to the north. And then everything else around here is not really chargeable. So that, I mean, within a copper porphyry, you would expect this kind of signature, so that's a good sign. This is where the main body and mining happens. And then here we see that these Stahini groups and these mafic volcanics are generally quite resistive. We've got more conductive here, sediments, which is pretty much quite common to see with sediments. And it might be that, you know, over top of the red stock, some of those sediments might causing some of that conductivity to, or those units to be conductive as well. More interesting is like what's going on here. That's also chargeable and conductive. And it's not shown on the geology map. So there's some things that, you know, maybe the geophysics is showing that could be refined in the geology map as well. So I'll show comparison of 2D versus 3D slides now. As you remember, from 2D, we have an image under each line, whereas in 3D, we get a volume. So at first glance, they're actually very similar, and that's great, because the geology is relatively 2D as well compared to how the survey was run. So it's no surprise that we shouldn't get huge discrepancies between them. What we do see, though, is that, you know, here in the 2D, there are some things going on here. Like, what is this feature compared to this more cleaner feature over here? And personally, I think this is an issue with how the data were inverted. I think it might have been run a little bit too far, and this isn't actually an artifact, or it's an element that we're dealing with a 3D world, and you're using a 2D assumption. So another reason why I think if you can, use 3D in this day and age. So now we can actually compare this to the thing below, this cross-section below. This is that Bowser Basin that lines up really well right here. We've got this chargeable unit, shows up really well in both. Some similar differences, and that's also, again, because we're using a 2D assumptions versus now being in the 3D world. These features here do not seem geologic to me. They kind of stick out as lumps attached underneath this would be the Bowser Basin. And I think this is really just an artifact in the 2D. So if you're not familiar with inversions, those could be easily interpreted as something else. So you have to be aware of the assumptions and the limitations of a code. So just a final look at the third slice. We get a nice chargeable anomaly right over top of the red stock. We get some good information from the resistivity section about what the geology is in terms of geophysics. So in summary, in 2009, this data was collected. It was initially processed and inverted by the survey company. They did 2D inversions for each line, and this was delivered to the client. Now in 2018, so just last year, we reprocessed and did the QA/QC again in Oasis Montage, and then did 3D inversion of all lines simultaneously using Voxy. Now, what is the impact of this? Well, I think that both the 2D and 3D results show good correlations with the geology. There's no blaring differences, and that's a good thing. That means that the models and the data are probably pretty robust, and they show a good representation of the resistivity and the chargeability for the red Chris deposit. I think the differences between the 2D and the 3D are likely due to the algorithm assumptions. The Earth is 3D, so assuming it's 2D is going to cause some issues with the model. I also think that there's a lot of personality that goes into inversions. If I gave you this data with the same code, we would all get different results because, the way that I assigned the data, uncertainties, what data actually chose to go into it, how far I ran it, is all going to influence the final model. So that's why it's also important to run multiple iterations and talk back and forth with the client and see, and especially the geologist, and see what's realistic, do they like this, then let's go back and do things again. And then, as Voxy is also able to do, is now we can start to constrain our inversion. We can pull in some of the drilling data, and as well as the geologic maps. If we know exactly where this fault is or a contact between two geologic units, we can put that into the inversion and better constrain our 3D model so that the model represents what's actually known about the Earth as well. And I think between 2009 and now, 3D inversion allowed more value from this old data. So now that the mine has been under operation for the last 5 years, they can review this model as they continue to explore deeper. The latest thing that with new crust they want to do is continue mining below the open pit on the eastern end. So maybe they can now use this data, and especially the magnetotelluric data, which I didn't show today, it would have a deeper sensitivity. So then, they could look deeper, reevaluate it, see where to continue the mining process from there. So with that, I thank you, and I'll take any questions if you have any.